The desert swallowed sound. That was the first thing Greta Hoffman noticed as the transport truck's engine cut and the tailgate dropped with a metallic clang. No birdsong, no wind, just heat pressing down like a physical weight, turning the air to glass. She stepped onto Arizona soil in April 1945, her wrists still bearing the rope burns from the journey, blinking against sunlight so bright it felt like punishment. 22 years old and absolutely certain she was walking toward her death. The other women climbed down behind her, 12 in total, ranging from nurses to clerks to radio operators like herself. They'd been captured in different places, processed through different camps, but they all carried the same rigid posture, spine straight, chins level. Their families had trained them this way, to die with dignity rather than beg for mercy from those they'd been taught to fear. Greta's grandmother had gripped her face at Munich railway station 3 months earlier, fingers like talons. They will starve you. They will parade you through streets for their amusement. Don't let them break you. Die with honor. She'd believed every word, but the woman walking toward them now wore an officer's uniform with lieutenant's bars and carried a clipboard instead of a rifle. Japanese-American, Greta realized with a jolt. Dark hair pinned severely, expression neutral as carved stone. She stopped 3 paces away and said in flawless German, "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Tanaka. Welcome to Camp Florence. Follow me for processing. No shouting, no dogs, no hands raised to strike." The women exchanged glances, confusion rippling through the group like wind over water. Greta felt her chest tighten. This had to be theater, the calm before the real horror began. Processing took an hour. They were assigned bunks in a wooden barracks that smelled of pine sap and dust. Greta stared at the thin mattress on her cot, the first actual bed she'd touched in weeks, and felt her throat close. A bar of ivory soap sat on the pillow, white and clean as a lie. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, waiting for it to dissolve into ash. "Where are the whips?" whispered Anna Scholes, the youngest at 19, her voice cracking. "Where are the dogs?" No one answered. They were all thinking it. The dinner bell rang at 6 in the evening. Greta filed into the mess hall with the others, shoulders tight, preparing for watery gruel or moldy bread. The smell hit her like a fist. Roasting meat, yeast, butter, real coffee. Her stomach clenched so hard she nearly doubled over. Jimmy Mueller, the camp mess sergeant, stood behind the serving line with a ladle and an easy smile. He gestured at the trays. Greta held hers out with shaking hands. He piled it high. A thick slab of beef roast, pink in the center, mashed potatoes with a pat of butter melting into gold. Green beans, a roll that gave off steam when she touched it. Canned peaches in heavy syrup. Greta stared. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "This is American prison food," she whispered in German, the words barely audible. Liesel Weber materialized at her elbow, 38 years old, hard as winter, a former SS auxiliary who'd been barking orders since the transport. She slapped the fork from Greta's hand. It clattered to the floor. "Don't touch it," Liesel hissed. "It's poisoned." "They want us to think we're safe, then." She drew a finger across her throat, the gesture sharp and final. "They're playing with us, testing us. The real punishment comes later." Greta's pulse hammered in her ears. It made sense. Of course it made sense. Everything she'd been taught said Americans were barbaric, vengeful, cruel. You didn't feed your enemies well unless you were fattening them for slaughter. But then Lieutenant Tanaka sat down across the table from them. She set her own tray down, identical to theirs, down to the last green bean, and cut into her beef with calm precision. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, met Greta's eyes, and said in that same level German, Geneva Convention, Article 26, prisoners of war receive the same rations as the captain nation's troops. You can check the Red Cross report if you'd like. It's posted in the barracks. Greta's entire world tilted on its axis. If they lied about the food, about this, what else was a lie? That night, long after lights out, Greta pulled the cold piece of beef from her pocket. She'd saved it without thinking, hidden it in her sleeve like contraband. She lifted it to her mouth in the darkness, feeling the weight of Liesel's glare from across the room. It tasted like treason. It tasted like truth, and she couldn't stop the tears that came after. By the end of the first week, Greta had earned $3.60. She held the camp script in her palm like it might evaporate. These paper vouchers printed with the camp seal felt like more money than she'd ever possessed in Germany. The work wasn't hard. Laundry duty meant hauling wet uniforms from industrial washers to clotheslines that stretched across the compound, her hands turning pink in the hot water. 8 hours a day, 80 cents per day. The math felt absurd. At the canteen on Saturday, she bought toothpaste, real toothpaste in a metal tube, writing paper, a pencil. She stood at the counter, touching each item like they might burn her, waiting for someone to laugh and snatch them away. But the clerk, a bored corporal who barely looked up, just took her script and waved her along. Anna Scholes bought cigarettes. She didn't smoke, but she clutched the pack like a talisman anyway. Proof that this strange reality hadn't dissolved yet. Greta watched Lieutenant Tanaka constantly now, studied her the way you'd study a locked door, searching for the mechanism that would explain how it worked. Sarah moved through the camp with mechanical efficiency, clipboard always in hand, enforcing rules with the same flat consistency, whether the violation was minor or serious. No raised voices, no favoritism. When a guard tried to skip a POW's dessert ration as a joke, Sarah reassigned him to night watch for a month. When Liesel hoarded bread in her footlocker, Sarah confiscated it without comment and logged the incident in triplicate. What Greta couldn't understand was the restraint. Sarah should hate them, should want them to suffer. Her parents were imprisoned in some camp in California. Greta had overheard guards talking about it, and her brother had died fighting in Italy. Died proving his loyalty to a country that locked up his family anyway. Yet here she stood, enforcing the Geneva Convention like it was scripture, treating enemy women with a care that felt more disturbing than cruelty ever could. One evening, Sarah found Greta sitting alone in the barracks, staring at a blank piece of writing paper. The others had gone to the recreation hall for a film screening, but Greta couldn't make herself go. Couldn't make herself do anything but sit with the pencil hovering over the page. "Writer's block?" Sarah asked in German, her accent precise and oddly formal. Greta looked up, startled. "I don't know what to say to my family, if they're even—" She couldn't finish. The truth is usually a good start. The truth is I'm being treated better here than I ever was at home. The words came out sharp, almost angry. The truth is I eat steak while they starve. How do I write that? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth-bound book, a German-English dictionary. The cover was worn soft at the edges. She set it on the bunk beside Greta. "Thought you might want to read the convention yourself, article by article. It's not mercy, it's law. There's a difference." Greta picked up the dictionary slowly, feeling the weight of it. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Treating us like we're human." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Because the law says you are. And the minute I stop following the law, I become what I'm fighting against." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your family would want to know you're alive. Write that first. Everything else can wait." After she left, Greta opened the dictionary. The pages smelled like ink and old paper. She started with the basics. "Hello. Thank you, please," but found herself drawn to other words. Restraint, justice, mercy. She sounded them out quietly, testing the shapes in her mouth. By the end of the second week, she'd begun teaching English to the younger POWs in exchange for their dessert rations. Anna was her best student, absorbing vocabulary with frightening speed. Even Liesel showed up once, standing at the back of the barracks with her arms crossed, listening but never participating. "Why are you learning their language?" Liesel demanded one night, her voice cutting through the darkness after lights out. Greta didn't answer right away. She thought about the dictionary, about Sarah's mechanical kindness that somehow hurt more than cruelty, about the steak that tasted like treason. "Because I want to understand what they're saying," she finally replied. "When they tell us why, there is no why. There's only waiting until we can go home." But Greta wasn't sure anymore what home even meant, or if there was anything left to go back to. 3 months passed like water through fingers. Greta learned to sleep without startling awake, learned to eat without checking the food for poison first. She learned the English words for sunrise and coffee and good morning, and how to say them to Jimmy Mueller when he handed her breakfast with that same gentle smile. The camp settled into routine, work details and mail call and evening recreation, until the day Lieutenant Tanaka gathered all the women and marched them to the camp theater without explanation. The room was small and close, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a white screen. A projector sat in the back, already threaded and humming. Sarah stood at the front, her face carved from stone. Day was 2 weeks ago, she said in German, her voice carrying no inflection whatsoever. The war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered. What you're about to see are newsreels from the Allied liberation of concentration camps. You will watch all of it. There will be no leaving early. Greta's stomach dropped. Beside her, Anna had gone white as paper. The lights dimmed. The projector clicked to life. Bergen-Belsen appeared first. Mountains of skeletal bodies stacked like cordwood, limbs twisted at impossible angles, living prisoners who looked like animated corpses, hollow-eyed and swaying. British soldiers wearing masks against the stench, using bulldozers to push the dead into mass graves because there were too many to bury any other way. Then Dachau, then Auschwitz. Greta made it through 15 minutes before she stumbled up the aisle and out the side door, hand clamped over her mouth. She barely made it to the edge of the building before her stomach emptied violently onto the desert sand. She retched until there was nothing left, then kept retching, her body trying to expel something that couldn't be vomited away. She didn't hear Sarah approach, didn't know she was there until the lieutenant's shadow fell across the ground beside her. "Did you know?" Sarah asked quietly. Greta wiped her mouth with shaking hands. "No," her voice came out hoarse, barely recognizable. "I didn't. We didn't. I was just a radio operator. I just relayed messages and coordinates." And she stopped because the excuse died in her throat. "But I should have asked. I should have wondered why they needed so many trains, so many camps. I should have..." Should have what? Asked questions, looked harder, refused. The words felt pathetic even as she spoke them. What could one radio operator have done? What difference would her single refusal have made? But she'd never even tried. Sarah was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its mechanical edge. "My parents lost their grocery store in San Francisco. Everything they'd built in 30 years, gone in a week. My brother enlisted to prove his loyalty, to show we were real Americans. He died at Anzio with a bullet in his chest and a flag on his coffin." She looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I wanted to hate every single one of you. I wanted you to suffer the way my family suffered. The way those people in the camps suffered." Greta couldn't breathe, couldn't move. "The law said you were human." Sarah's voice was steady as she made her point. "The Geneva Convention made it clear. You get the same food I eat, the same medical care, the same basic human dignity. That's not negotiable. So I had to act like I believed it. Even when I didn't feel it deep down, even when every fiber of my being wanted to rebel against it." She paused, her throat tight. "Restraint isn't kindness," she went on. "It's the only thing holding back the darkness. Without it, we slip into something worse than any of them." He turned back toward the theater, where the projector still cast its flickering light. Greta wanted to speak. She wanted to say something, to apologize or explain or somehow ask for forgiveness. But what words could possibly be adequate? What language existed for something this massive? 2 weeks passed, and the women put together a concert in the recreation hall. Someone had managed to dig up an old upright piano. Sarah sat down to play, her fingers stumbling over the keys, laughing at her own mistakes, while the German women sang folk songs their grandmothers had taught them years before. Simple melodies about mountains and rivers and the slow turning of seasons. Nothing that carried a message, just music. Even Lisa seemed different that evening, pulling out photographs of her children and passing them around with fingers that trembled slightly. For one strange, suspended hour, the boundary between prisoners and guards dissolved. They were just women reaching back toward something human. That night, Greta wrote another letter home. She'd written so many already, all of them left unanswered. She folded the paper with care and addressed it in her most careful handwriting. "I am safe," she wrote. "They treat us well. I hope you are alive to read this." She held no real hope for a reply. Then, 3 days later, a Red Cross envelope arrived. It felt too light, almost weightless. Greta held it in the barracks, feeling the absence inside it like a presence. There was official letterhead, stamps. Her fingers wouldn't stop shaking as she tore it open. The words seemed to swim across the page. She had to read them again and again before they made any sense. Her mother and her younger brother were dead. They'd been killed in the February firebombing of Dresden. Her father was missing, last seen when the Soviets advanced. Presumed dead, her grandmother had taken her own life in the garden shed 2 days after the surrender, unable to face the collapse of everything she'd devoted herself to. Greta folded the letter with mechanical care. The edges felt sharp. She placed it in her footlocker beneath the German-English dictionary, then climbed onto her bunk and stared upward. She felt absolutely nothing. That nothing lasted 3 days. She stopped eating. The food on her tray, still generous, still hot, seemed obscene somehow. While her mother had burned alive, Greta had been gaining weight. While her brother had suffocated in the rubble, she'd been sleeping on a real mattress. While her grandmother had chosen death over dishonor, Greta had been learning English and singing folk songs with the enemy. Jimmy Mueller noticed first. He approached her table at dinner, worry creasing his broad face. "You need to eat something, miss." "Please." She stared at the steak on her plate. It might as well have been ash. That night, Liesel cornered her in the barracks. The older woman's face was hard, her eyes blazing with something between anger and vindication. "I told you," she hissed in rapid German. "I told you they were playing games. Now you see it, don't you? They fed you while your family died. They made you comfortable while Germany burned. They turned you into a traitor." "I never," Greta started, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. "You befriended them. That English woman, you learned their language. You laughed at their piano playing." Lisa's voice grew sharper, cutting like a blade. "You chose them over your own people, over your own blood. That's not friendship, that's collaboration, a betrayal. Your grandmother killed herself because she understood honor, and you." Lisa spat at her feet. "You make me sick." Something snapped loose inside Greta's chest. She launched herself at Liesel. Fists flew, her voice tearing out in screams that weren't words. They crashed into a bunk, bodies tangled together as others tried to pull them apart. Greta felt a fist strike her jaw, tasted blood, didn't care. She wanted to hurt something, wanted to make the world hurt the way she did. Guards flooded into the barracks. Strong hands dragged her away. She was still screaming when they locked her in the isolation cell. A small concrete room with a cot and a bucket and nothing else. The silence bore down like a physical thing. For 3 days, she sat there and faced the question she'd been avoiding since the newsreels. Since the letter, since the first bite of steak 3 months earlier, did being treated with mercy make her complicit? Did surviving when her family died mean she'd betrayed them? Was her gratitude the same as treason? On the 3rd day, Sarah came to the cell door. She didn't unlock it. She just sat on the floor outside, her back against the bars, and spoke through the gap. "I read the report about your family," Sarah said quietly. "I'm sorry." Greta said nothing. What could she possibly say? "You didn't kill them," Sarah continued. "You didn't drop the bombs or start the war or vote for any of it. You were 22 years old and following orders because that's what you'd been taught to do." "I should have been there," Greta said, her voice cracking. "To die with them, would that have made it better? It would have been honest. Instead, I'm here, safe, fed, alive." While there, she couldn't finish. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't choose to be captured," she said. "You didn't choose to be fed. But you can choose what you do with the fact that you survived." She stood, brushing dust from her uniform. "People are going to need bridges. Between languages, between enemies, between the world that was and the world that's coming. You can be that bridge. Or you can let the guilt destroy you from the inside. Either way, your family is still gone and you're still here." She walked away, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Greta pulled herself up on the thin mattress and finally let herself cry. Not the quiet tears from before, but deep, wrenching sobs that tore through her and left her gasping. She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but the terrible, unbearable fact that she was still alive. And the question of what to do with that fact. They released Greta on a Wednesday morning. She walked back to the barracks with her jaw still tender and her hands still shaking. The other women were preparing for repatriation. The camp was sending them back to occupied Germany in waves on transport ships heading to Hamburg or Bremen. Most were terrified. Anna sat on her bunk, clutching a single photograph of her family home, now just rubble, crying silently. "There's nothing to go back to," she whispered. "No house, no family, no jobs, just ruins and starvation and Russian soldiers." She looked up at Greta with red-rimmed eyes. "At least here we were treated as human. At least here we have beds and food and nobody." She stopped, unable to continue. Liesel stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the desert. "We should have stayed prisoners," she said bitterly. "It's the only safe place left for us." Greta felt hollow, scooped out. She had no family to return to, no home, no identity beyond the lies she'd been taught, and the mercy she still couldn't fully accept. She moved through the days like a ghost, doing her work mechanically, eating only because Sarah watched her with those steady dark eyes until she took at least a few bites. A week after her release from isolation, Sarah found her in the laundry room and handed her an envelope. "A Red Cross needs a translator," Sarah said. "A German refugee in Tucson is looking for her daughter. Lost track of her somewhere between Munich and the Swiss border." "I told them you might help." Greta stared at the letter, written in shaky German script, a mother's desperate plea full of specific details. The daughter's birth date, the color of her coat, a distinctive scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident, the kind of details only a real mother would know. "I don't know how," Greta started. "You read German, you read English. You understand how systems work now," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "It's not redemption, but it's something real." Greta took the letter. She spent 3 hours that evening carefully translating it, adding notes about where to search, which agencies to contact, what paperwork would be needed. She walked it back to Sarah's office after lights out and went back to her bunk feeling something she couldn't name. 2 days later, another letter arrived, then another. Word had spread somehow through the camp. There was a German POW who could help with missing persons cases, who understood both languages and could navigate the bureaucratic maze. Greta translated requests, wrote letters, filled out forms, small acts that seemed inadequate against the ocean of suffering, but real nonetheless. One evening, Sarah brought her a follow-up. The Tucson mother had found her daughter in a displaced persons camp near Stuttgart. They'd been reunited. The daughter was alive. Greta read the thank you letter 3 times, then pressed her palm against her mouth to stop the sob that wanted to escape. One person. One small thread reconnected in the vast, torn fabric of Europe. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. A Red Cross worker visited the camp 2 weeks before repatriation began. Tall, with efficient movements and kind eyes, she was recruiting staff for displaced persons relief operations. They desperately needed German speakers, people who could help survivors navigate aid systems, fill out paperwork, locate missing relatives, translate trauma into forms that bureaucracies could process. "It's not glamorous work," the woman said, addressing the gathered POWs in careful German. "Long hours, difficult conditions, heartbreaking cases. But if you want to help rebuild, this is where it starts." Greta sat in the back of the room. Sarah stood against the wall nearby. Their eyes met. Sarah nodded once, barely perceptible. That night, Greta pulled out the German-English dictionary and found the word she needed: purpose. She sounded it out quietly, testing the shape of it. When the Red Cross worker asked for volunteers the next morning, Greta raised her hand. Liesel watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. "You're still choosing them," she said later, "still turning your back on your own people." "No," Greta replied quietly, "I'm choosing the people who need help. That includes my own people. It includes everyone." The day before repatriation, all the women were asked to sign statements about their treatment for Red Cross documentation. Liesel refused, still holding to her belief that it had all been theatre, manipulation, psychological warfare. But Greta sat at the table with a pen and wrote in careful English, each word deliberate. I came expecting cruelty. I was given mercy. I expected savagery. I was given law. I do not understand mercy, but I witnessed it. I will spend the rest of my life learning to pass it forward. She signed her name at the bottom and slid the paper across to Sarah, who read it without expression, then looked up and held Greta's gaze for a long moment. Good luck, Sarah said simply.